Well, hello, I'm Leanne.
And hello, I'm Jason, and this is Let's Talk.
This is a space where no topic is off limits, where from we will discuss everything from well-being and resilience, which we're going to cover off today, from leadership to money, relationships and mindset, and so much more.
Here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real stories, and honest conversations. Because the things we don't often talk about end up being the things that matter most.
Our goal here is simple. We really want to just spark new ideas, shift our mindsets a little bit, and give you practical tools that you can use in your life and in your leadership.
So, whether you're tuning in to Let's Talk for inspiration, growth, or just a fresh perspective,
Let's talk.
okay,
Let's do
let's do it.
it. So, today our topic is all about emotional well-being, specifically around the concept of resilience. And what we're going to start with, I think, is some personal stories just to give you a bit of a feel around what emotional well-being looks like and also what it doesn't look like.
Exactly. And through these personal stories that both Leanne and I will share, will show how emotions can derail us or empower us, right? So I'll start off with a story. And on the side of how emotions can derail or upset. Um, so I worked with an executive at one point on a big project that encompassed many different people throughout the organization and had high level of influence in the organization. And as I was working with this individual really let their emotions take over, whether it was in meetings or personal conversations or um, different interactions. And from my personal story is that their emotions got so large and in charge and really took control of the situation in not a good way. It actually really, for me personally, and I feel like I'm a pretty aware, calm, and collect person overall. And it really enraged me to a spot where I really had to use the practice of taking a step back, being mindful, taking a walk around the block to really recenter myself and to really think about why am I letting this executive's emotions and how they show up actually affect me at such a deep level. And so it really took me some time to work through that process of saying, okay, you know what? Just take a step back. You're in control, and you're in control of how you let others' emotions affect you. I think that's probably one of the big things I want to drive home in my story is we all have our own power t- to let how other people's emotions either affect us or not affect us. And so I will say from my story and my interaction, I'm much more aware now of how those who are at higher title levels and have more authority or control, whether that's within the organization or budget or whatever, that I have the power at the end of the day to say, nope, I'm not letting that person's emotions or how they show up affect me. Um, so with that, I'm going to turn over to you, Leanne. But the biggest thing is you have you have the power. Just remember that you have the power on how you show up and how you let others affect you and your own emotional well-being.
I really love that. Not today. I'm not letting you affect me today. Right.
Exactly.
Um, and what I really hear in that, Jason, is actually how you were able to navigate your emotions. So rather than being hijacked by them, you
Hmm.
navigated them, you took the steps, you went for a walk, you kind of calmed your farm, so to speak, so you could then think logically. Because what I know for sure for me is that if my emotions kick in, then I can't make effective decisions. I
Hmm.
can't come up with new ideas. And we're going to talk about the neuroscience as to why that happens shortly. And I can't then create the outcome that I want. When I'm in reaction mode, I'm out of control. Um, and I've got a story to share of that when I was um, several years ago. I've got twins, okay? They're just turned 18, but when they were little people, I recall my mum's husband was unfortunately killed in a one punch episode, which was an awful situation. And we were all on high emotive states, as you could imagine. There was a whole lot of stuff going on: grief, disbelief, anger, a whole lot of sadness, like every emotion that you could imagine, we were going through. And I rang a restaurant because I said to my mum, we're not going to cook. We just need to go out and try and get past this, because it was quite a long process. So I rang the restaurant and I said, okay, do you have high chairs? I've got two kids. And they said, yep, we do. And I said, two, I need two high chairs. And they said, yep, we've got two high chairs. So I pack up the kids, which is always a mission when you've got twins, like, it's mass production. We get to the restaurant a little while later and walk in, and I've got one child in one hand, my mum's got the other child in the other hand, and we walk in and they go, there's your table, and with one high chair. And I'm like, no, I specifically called and I needed two high chairs. And they said, well, I'm sorry, somebody else is using the high chair. We can't take it off them. I lost my bananas. I was ranting, I was raving, I was screaming at them, but I called them, like it was awful. And then, we turned around and walked out of the restaurant, and it was an awful situation. And I had no control. And my reaction was not how I would normally respond. But because my emotions had taken over, I was just not able to function or reason. Like there was just no reasoning. I actually just lost my bananas at these people to the point where I got home and I had to ring them actually later once I had calmed down and apologized for my response and explained why it was so important, what we'd gone through. And they were mortified once they heard my story. And that was all good. But in the moment, there was no control. And what I know for sure is that my emotions affected other people because of emotion contagion. So not only did I affect myself, my children became all skitty, my mum was kind of shaken, my auntie who was there was also kind of ruffled, but all the people in the restaurant were also ruffled, like by the time I walked out. And like looking back in hindsight, there was absolutely no emotion regulation in that at all. I was just out of control. So our emotions can derail us. And when they do, we never get the results that we want, usually. Um, and we also then have emotion remorse afterwards, right? Around, oh
Yeah.
God, that's not how I want to show up or be remembered or be seen. So we do have a choice. I love that concept that you brought in, Jason, about, we have a choice around how we show up. And we have to be responsible as parents, as leaders, as members of the community for the energy that we bring into the room because we directly affect everybody else. And I think sometimes we don't realize that our emotions will um, affect other people. And like I say, we'll talk more about this as we get into the neuroscience a little bit.
Yeah. And I think one thing to add on to that, to Leanne, which I think you would agree, is, when you're in a high emotive state, right? It's good to have those one or two people in your trust circle
Yeah.
that you can call or go on a walk with to vent, to get it out, that you know that you can trust at 110%, so that it doesn't lay nested within you to keep stirring.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. So long as we're not ringing 20 people and venting, because then we're reliving the story and re-traumatizing ourselves,
Oh, yeah.
basically, re-emotionalizing ourselves. I know that's not a word, but you'll get used to me and my Leanneisms. But absolutely, to have somebody that you can kind of talk to and process what's occurred, that is a safe environment, so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why, we want to talk, and I'll turn it back over to you here, Leanne, in just a moment, on why emotional well-being matters so much in today's high pressure world, and just all the complexities and everything coming at us, through, different avenues of text messages, phone calls, emails, instant chats, social media, etc. So I'll turn it over to you to explain VUCA and Bonnie.
Yeah. So I love the fact that Americans and Australians pronounce things so differently. Um, so I say VUCA and Banny, but anyway, so I love it. So you might have heard these terms. We're living in a VUCA world, and VUCA is an acronym that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if you think about the world we're currently living in at the moment, there is so much volatility everywhere. There's wars, there's things happening, political states, there's poverty, there's so much volatility in the world, and there's so much uncertainty. Like, we just don't know when it's going to end, or if it's going to end, even, right? We just don't know what tomorrow holds. There's so much complexity in the mix. Like, we just don't seem to be able to follow the dots anymore, right? Like, things are just so complex. And what used to take us, no time now probably takes us less time to do things with technology, but it doesn't stop. Like, it's coming at us all the time. And it's ambiguous. Like, we just don't know what the outcomes are going to be. We just don't know what tomorrow, next month, next year is going to look like because of the environment that we're living in. So this VUCA world creates stress for all of us. And even if we're not personally stressed, because emotions are contagious, we're also picking up on collective stress, right? Or collective emotions from everybody else. So even though we might feel regulated to a degree, everybody else's stress raises our blood pressure. Our heartbeat starts pumping faster because of it. And it has us feeling banny. And what banny stands for is it has us feeling brittle, right? Like, we feel like we're just not as robust as we used to be. There's this sense of brittleness to us. We also feel, oh, geez, mental blank, anxious, right? There's a whole lot of anxiety that comes through because of this brittle state. It's non-linear, like at the moment, things are, sometimes I feel like I am a ball in a pinball machine. And, you hit it with the flipper and it kind of bounces all over the place and there's rubbers. So it's non-linear. The things that we used to do in a linear format or is no longer there. And it's incomprehensible. Like, we just can't get our heads around what's going on in the world today. And because of this, our cruising altitude, shall we say, our internal cruising altitude might have been down here before, where, a fair bit could happen before we would kind of flip our lid and get super stressed out. But because of the complexity of the world right now, our cruising altitude is here. So it's not taking much for people to have an emotional reaction or to, have burnout or to feel really stressed out. And all of these things are impacting our capacity to do the work that we do, to lead the way we want to lead, and even parent the way we want to parent because of all of this going on. So it's really interesting, and I think it's an important conversation to have. How can we turn the dial down on those emotions so we can actually show up um, as our best selves, not as our frazzled, kind of stretched selves with all of this stress and anxiety?
Exactly. And I think, one thing that one of my professors in grad school, I'm actually in grad school again, but my first time that I was in grad school at Pepperdine University, in the business school, one of my professors told our cohort to always remember this phrase: it is what it is, and it's not always necessary to react. I'll say that again. It is what it is, and it's not always necessary to react. So if you really think about it, right, when you're in these high emotive states or you're getting anxious about something, really look at that circle. And you can find them on Google, on LinkedIn. I mean, you can find this circle around what you have in your control and what is not in your control, right? So if you make yourself aware to that, just some of the stuff it is what it is. And I'm not going to react to it.
Yeah.
Versus the stuff that is in your control, right? To say, okay, like I have a little more leverage to react to it, but am I reacting to it in an emotionally mature way, which we'll talk about a little bit later in today's episode. So just remember, think about what's outside of your control and just say, you know what, it is what it is. It's not necessary to react. And what is in your control, and where you do have more leverage to react, but are you doing it in an aware and an emotionally mature way?
Yeah.
With
I lo-
that, oh, I'm sorry, Leanne.
no, I was just going to say, I love the circles of control because oftentimes we get so frazzled by the things that we have no influence over and no control over. And then there are
Yeah,
things, as you said, that we can influence, but really the only thing that we can control is ourselves.
yeah,
And a lot of the time, that's difficult, let alone even trying to control other people. Like it just doesn't work. So, yeah,
yeah.
sorry, Jason, I cut in there.
No, 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 no. And I think, this speaks a lot to our subtopic within emotional well-being around resilience in action. And what does that mean? We're going to be talking a lot around in different segments of resilience, and you'll start seeing the tie-in, right? And I have a little story back in 2020, pre-pandemic. I went to this New Year's Eve party. Well, actually, it was first week of January, actually. So it wasn't actually New Year's Eve, but it was a, uh, poised as a New Year's party plus a housewarming party. And one of the fun activities that the host had was these little wood round Christmas tree pieces of wood that you could write on. And so on the one side, we were to write the our word for the year. And then on the opposite side, our intentions for the year. Well, my word for 2020 was resilience. And boy, did that come into uh, into effect and into play in a big major way once COVID hit. And just looking at all the areas that I could not control, right?
Oh, it looks like Jason might have frozen. Well, I might just kick in here for a moment until we get Jason back. Don't you love the idea of doing things live, using technology, and then computers freeze, things happen? Um, quite interesting. And this can often cause us a stress state. So I'll go back to Jason when he comes back, but I really just wanted to talk about resilience because what is it exactly? Resilience is the ability to be able to bounce forward. It's about really taking the time to turn down the dial on the emotional state that we have. Because as humans, we really have a requirement for stability. And as I discussed with VUCA and Banny, that's kind of flown out the window. And we really have to consider that we are actually wired for safety, for routine, and for connection. Like we've got to actively bring these things into our world. Constant change triggers our stress responses. And we'll talk more about these stress responses, but this sense of anxiety, this sense of brittle that we've talked about, this sense of burnout that so many people are feeling because of the complexity of the world. And over time, this really does erode our well-being. And what does well-being mean? It erodes our physical health. So we start having literally dis-ease in our body if we've got dis-ease in our mind. It reduces our cognitive functionality. So our ability to be able to think and respond and make decisions and take information in and to collaborate and to innovate with others. It reduces our ability to sleep. And as we spoke last week with PJ, sleeping is an active state and it is this, we don't get enough of it. And when we're in complete turmoil, um, we struggle with sleep. We often have insomnia, we can't sleep, we're not getting enough sleep. And that also then affects our emotional bandwidth. So we're not able to pause. We've got a much shorter fuse. We react quicker than we normally would. And all of this has a significant price on our families, on our colleagues and people that we work with, all sorts of things. So we really need to be mindful of this and we need to intentionally have strategies for grounding ourselves, for repair, this internal repair, and for recovery. So we really need to navigate this space and really think about, okay, so how do I ground? How do I repair? How do I recover when I'm in a stress state? So resilience isn't about eliminating stress at all, right? Because we can't eliminate it. The world is what it is. So resilience is more about building our internal nervous system, right? Our mindset and our community so that we can hold it. We can hold the stress and that the community can hold us while we're holding the stress. So it's super important that we look at this concept of resilience today and how we can build some muscle around emotional regulation, which feeds into emotional well-being. So, Jason, we lost you, and I just kind of continued upon the resilience. Would you like to pick up your story where you left off?
And that was resilience in action. I am streaming in from a hotel, so it was definitely a moment of a little bit of stress, but I recentered myself and I was like, you know what? I know Leeanne is taking over. And so, yeah, so basically, what I was saying in my story was that really my word of the year in 2020, resilience, really came into action and really took hold in so many facets of life, from work and being fully virtual to, being at home and having to do everything at home, from exercise to work to entertainment activities, et cetera, et cetera. So it just really showed me actually how resilient I was, and that I actually, had questioned myself sometimes in the, pre-COVID, and like, am I really a resilient person? Yes, sometimes, but it really showed me in 2020 how resilient I really was. So that's kind of where I was ending my story on the internet now.
And technology, hey? I was saying as you fell out and before you came back in that technology causes a huge amount of stress for lots of people, right?
Yes.
It's one of the biggest threat states. It's like, oh my God. So navigating that and coming back and just being able to fly, Jason, you're demonstrating resilience now.
Yeah. And, it's like you and I talk, Leanne, right? It's like when you go live, you're live and so many things can happen, and it was a result, but our resilience comes into play, and emotions and all that. So thank you for that, and I'll turn it back over to you to start our segment for emotional well-being.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak to neuroscience, a little bit of the neuroscience in relation to our brain and our stress states. And it looks like poor Jason is frozen again. So it looks like today's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for us, but never mind, right? The show must go on. Um, so what I want to talk about is this concept that you might have heard of an amygdala hijack. It was coined by Daniel Goleman, and he talks about the emotional center of the brain. It's kind of like the alarm system of the brain. So our emotional center is basically scanning the environment, or our brain, I should say, is scanning the environment multiple times a second, looking for threats. It's never looking for what's good. It's always looking for it. Is it a threat? Um, and our brain's number one job is to keep us alive, not happy, but alive. And so while this is subconsciously scanning the environment, looking for threat states, when it notices a threat state, we have what they like to call an amygdala hijack. And the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. And what its job is to send out this alarm system telling us that there's a threat in the environment and that we need to be aware. Now, we think our brains are, really evolved, but in fact, we're not so evolved. What we know is that we've still got quite a primitive response to emotional stress. So if we cast our minds back to the day, well, we weren't there, but I mean, we've read enough stories about primitive people living on the savannah, when they have this threat come in, the saber-toothed tiger, for instance, that's going to eat them, they don't want to stop and pause and think about, okay, what do we need to do? That amygdala goes into overdrive and has us respond so we can fight, flight, freeze. Um, there's also fawn and flock. So in community, when we flock, we're safer. And this is an automatic response to keep us alive. So our brain consistently throws these warning signs out to us and we respond. Now, what happens when we're under a emotive state or when the emotional center of our brain takes over is that our executive function, the thinking part of our brain, it kind of goes offline. It's like a seesaw. All the resources get taken from our thinking brain and into our body so we can perform, we can fight if we need to, we can flight and run away if we need to. And the emotional brain takes those resources away. So we're not able to make decisions very easily. We're not able to understand information, to learn new things, to inhibit our natural responses, to recall things that we have before, to memorize information. So all of those things kind of go offline under an emotional state. And in today's world, given that the stress level is so high, people's capacity isn't as high anymore. Like we're running on overdrive in order to do this. So when those resources get taken away, everything that we do kind of um, gets taken away as well. The effectiveness of what we do. So under a threat state, we can actually lift heavier things. It's why you hear stories of mums lifting cars to save their babies. We can run faster. We can do things that have been hardwired and automatic in us better and faster. But what we can't do is innovate, collaborate, right? Or do, deep thinking under a threat state. And this fight, flight, freeze kind of environment that happens in our body helps us to navigate the threats. But these days, the threats are not saber-toothed tigers. These days, the threats are the boss saying, can I have a talk to you? These days, the threats are something like the email that we receive or the client who's on the phone who's, not real happy. Our threats are not the saber-toothed tiger anymore, but our response system is still the same as it used to be. So we need to learn strategies to turn that down so we can actually utilize our prefrontal cortex. So we can't eliminate the stress, but what we can do is turn the emotional center down so we can do that deep thinking as we need to as we go through. And yeah, so our brain is a magnificent tool, but it's a terrible master. And unfortunately, we allow our emotions to be the master as opposed to us being the master, and learning the skills to choose the right action over reaction is where we have our greatest strengths, right? So, Jason, is there anything that you'd like to bring into that?
Yeah, when you were talking through that, it made me reflect some on our episode last week with PJ. And, you know, that to always remember to, nourish ourselves, make sure to move 20 minutes a day, make sure to get ample rest so you have as much mental clarity and cognitive load or cognitive capacity as possible. So when you are in deflation mode, or that phone battery analogy last week, right? When you're in low battery mode, um, it's also amazing on how much it affects your emotional well-being, right? And being able to be centered and be able to take those steps back when you need to. And also, I think affects your emotional maturity state too, when you don't have yourself at as pristine capacity as possible. So and what you were talking about is like some of the physical signs to pay attention to, right, is your heart racing, tension, tunnel vision, snapping at others. That's all part of uh, low emotional well-being, intelligence, and maturity. And you have to ask yourself, okay, have I gotten some exercise today? Have I eaten? Have I hydrated myself, which is another thing that we talked about last week too. So it's also that awareness around how are you taking care of yourself physically through physical well-being in order to be in the best emotional well-being state. Um, and yeah, that's what I wanted to add in that area. Is there anything else you wanted to before we go into how we regulate our nervous system?
No, I just want to say that, for each different person, stress shows up differently,
Hmm.
and we often sit with judgment of others, but we want compassion for ourselves. And I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting. Like, if we've got to kind of look through the lens of compassion and go, okay, what's going on for that person, as opposed to reacting to that person.
Yeah.
Because we're all undergoing this high level of stress. We're all in this soup of anxiety and, volatility together. And for each person, it's different. You talked about some of those signs, the racing heart. For me, it's gut. Like, my gut starts playing up, right? I end up with, this really upset stomach. It really affects me. It feels like my tummy's in knots when I'm under a high stress or, in that fear state. Um,
Hmm.
and that kind of takes over everything as well, because when we're in that, we can't actually look through the lens of reality. We're kind of looking
Yeah.
through the lens of doom and gloom and all of the other stuff. So, yeah, I think it's so important. But there is some good news around this, right? There's some really good news, and that is that we can interrupt the pattern. And I just want to speak to the pattern really quickly. They've done research to say that most people um, feel about 5 emotions on a regular basis. Like, we have these habitual patterns of emotional responses that we're used to, because our brain likes the chemicals that we produce, and the chemicals of stress and cortisol and adrenaline, um, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, like all of this stuff that kicks in, we get addicted to it. So we could subconsciously even be creating environments to create that mental, um, those neurochemicals in our brain, because our brain really likes it. And so if we're going to think about it from a perspective of, do we have a choice? Can we interrupt the pattern? We absolutely can. And we can choose to start focusing and creating some of those feel good chemicals, the dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin. These are chemicals that have us feeling good, and it is our choice. We might feel like we've got no choice over our emotions, but as Jason said earlier, it is absolutely our choice, and we do have the capacity to be able to break the pattern and try something new.
Yeah. And so we do have some tools, right, in our toolbox to help us move from this reactionary state to response. And there's four major ones. Movement, which encompasses walking, stretching, shaking out the adrenaline. Use some of the tools that PJ talked about last week, right? In this movement area that could be simple, easy, non-difficult, that you can do at some different times of the day. Mindfulness, anchoring to being present in the moment and being aware of what's going on. Like, what are some of the things that are going on that can trigger your emotive state and your stress, and really being aware of those so that you can either remove yourself or say, hey, you know what, this is a great time for me to do some movement, and so that I can have some mindfulness as well. So you can kind of do two in one. Breath work is the next one. Breath work, breathing in through your nose, 4, holding for 4, and out for 6. And that helps to actually calm and regulate your vagus nerve, which is one of your biggest nerves in your body. And so remember breath work, and that's easy to do. You can do it at home. You can do it at work. You can do it when you're going out for a walk. So, I mean, really the movement, mindfulness, and breath work you can all do at the same time. Just remember to keep your eyes open if you're actually out for a walk. But in that breath work area, it is good to, if you're just doing that one, to close your eyes as well so that you can really be centered and in a mindful state. And lastly, pausing. Pausing is huge because it helps to create those micro moments between trigger and action. It's one of those things where, and I know we'll mention it a little bit later, is listening to understand versus listening to react. There is power in that. If you listen to understand someone or group or whatever versus listening just to immediately react, that immediate reaction is an emotive state. So you're not probably being in the best emotive state when you're just listening to react to something versus listening to understand. Doesn't mean you have to agree with what they're saying, but you're understanding. You're coming from an area of understanding. And so the neuroscience behind it, these practices, is re-engage the prefrontal cortex and calm the limbic system, lower the cortisol levels. So the key takeaway here is regulation isn't about control. It's about awareness and recovery. Is there anything that you'd like to add into this area, Leeanne?
So much. So much. It's really interesting because one of the things that you talked about was shake out the adrenaline, like shake your body. And I've seen, this work so much, especially for kids. You might see a kid who's out of control and they're on the ground and they're like they're screaming and they're physically moving, and then the emotion is passed, right? Now, I'm not saying that we should be screaming and doing all of this in the workplace, but just getting up and moving your body is the number one thing that you can do. Because I talked about this last week also with PJ about the triad that Tony Robbins talks about, and physiology comes first. If you move your physical state, your emotional state shifts. And it's so important that we can do that, because when we're stuck at our desk and we're kind of like this, right, we're holding that, the toxic soup in our bodies. Whereas if we start to physically move our state, we actually can release some of that emotion that might be happening, or that instead of having it trapped, right? We're actually expelling that. And we know that just getting out into nature, is such a great thing, which takes me to the mindfulness thing. Like when we're walking, actually feel the breeze on your face. Because not in your head, don't be in your head. Like actually pausing and feeling the breeze, feeling the sun hit your skin, smelling the scents as you're going through, like using your senses is a great mindfulness thing. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? What am I feeling? Is it the clothes on my skin, the sun? And the last one is taste, right? I mean, there's more that we can talk to, but those five senses can bring us back really quickly to the present moment. Because when we're in our head, we're dead, right? If we're in the present moment, then in this moment, everything is okay. If we're in our head, what I like to call the itty bitty shitty committee, that just escalates stress, right? When
Yeah.
we're overthinking and ruminating and marinating in it, right? Whereas when we can come back to our body in that mindfulness practice, it's so it just kind of turns down the dial on all of that stuff. Now you might not always be able to go out for a walk. Let's face it, if you're in a workplace and or in a meeting, which is why breath work is so important. But even if you're in the office, one mindfulness activity that I used to do is I'd go and wash my hands and I'd pause at the sink and actually feel the water. Like how many times, Jason, have you showered and not even really felt the water on your skin because you're thinking about what you've got to do tomorrow, what you could have, should have done yesterday, but you're not in the present, right? I know
Absolutely.
for me, it happens a lot. So just even going and washing your hands and feeling the water brings you back to presence, right? So using those senses. Now, you talked about breath work as well, and I love box breathing. I think it's one of the greatest skills that we can do. And that is where you count to four as a box. So you breathe in for four, you pause for four, you breathe out for 4 to 6, and then you pause for four again and do a couple of rounds of that. Now, you can do that, as Jason said, open eyed or closed eyed. And you can do that in meetings, and no one needs to know, but it instantaneously calms that parasympathetic nervous system. So it
Mhm.
calms your internal state, the vagus nerve and that parasympathetic nervous system. Super important. And the idea of pausing, Viktor Frankl said it so well. He brought in I think he called it Lego theory, and it's was it Viktor Frankl? I'm pretty sure it is. I'll research that, and if it's not, I'll make amends. But it's doing these activities, the movement, the mindfulness, the breath work, allows us to create a space between stimulus and response, as Jason said. And in that space, we can choose a response as opposed to reacting. This is all a practice. It's not about perfection. That's why they call it practice. So if you've got a meditation practice or a mindfulness practice, it's consistently practicing. And the more we practice these things, the more muscle we're building and the more resilience we're actually bringing in to be able to take on more and respond in a mature way as opposed to reacting, which we often do.
Yeah. And, one thing that I, like to bring around to the itty bitty shitty committee, right? And it's also a practice of resilience in action is, we have all of our different internal committee members, right? That can all get on the performing stage at the same time. And I think where that awareness comes in is like, you know what? Like, I don't need these 5 committee members right now. And it is okay to push them off to stage right or to stage left.
Yeah.
And that's a practice of resilience because, sometimes it's easy to go into default mode and let them all be on stage at the same time. But that practice and building that muscle, like Leeanne said, is like, you know what? I don't need you 5 right now. You can come back later. And so knowing as your kind of own personal director, right? Of, you have that control to say yes, who's on stage and yes, who's not on stage. So just wanted to put that additional analogy out there.
Yeah, I love that. Because sometimes they're all on stage at the same time and they've got megaphones, right? And they're screaming at us. So
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So
yeah.
um, so shall we move on to our next area? Okay, so since we talked about regulating the nervous system, right? Now we want to talk through how emotions as data, not problems. And there's some real glue in that. So it's all about like how you reframe your emotions. They're signals. You don't have to look at them as weaknesses. A lot of times people think, oh, there's this emotion or that emotion, or, you know, I need to keep my emotions, outside of work and, at home. We're human beings. It's all about how we reframe and how we look at those signals and how we take those signals and reframe them and put them in an advantageous space, not in a space of weakness. So
Can
the
I
first
just
one is
jump in
anger.
there? Can I
Yeah.
just jump in there for a second, Jason?
Yep.
Because what I tend to find in all the clients that I coach is that they label their emotion as good or bad. Like
Mhm.
happy, joy, they're good emotions. Anger, sadness, they're bad emotions. And we don't want the bad ones, but we want the good ones, right? But as Jason said, emotions aren't good or bad, they're just information. And if we
Mhm.
can actually tune into what they're telling us as opposed to diving into the feeling of it, then we've
Mhm.
got some real rigor around being the CEO of our internal state, as you talked about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that speaks a lot into that emotional maturity, right? Like, being able to say, okay, there's this emotion, and how can I reframe it? How can I look at it? How is it serving me in the moment?
Yeah.
Maybe your feeling of anger is serving you well in the moment, but how you move that forward tells the maturity behind how you're showing up within that emotion. Like, for example, anger, perfect example, um, nobody likes to be angry, but sometimes anger is like, it's a good piece of data. And why am I feeling anger? And how is it serving this current state? Um, and like I said, how you maneuver through that with the emotional maturity and the awareness can actually sometimes have an amazing result at the end. Is there anything you'd like to um, put in that space of anger?
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes anger is telling us that something's blocked or something's in the way or our boundary has been crossed. And that's
Hmm.
actually healthy. Like, that's not self abandonment. That's
Hmm.
actually self love going, oh, hang on a second. This has happened and I have a right to be angry. And if we harness that as opposed to getting angry, anger can mobilize us. It gets us into action. Sometimes it's the catalyst we need to, enough is enough. This is the line in the sand, right? Without anger, we may not necessarily do some of the things that we need to do. So
Right,
it's not that it's bad, it's that we can be in charge, right, of our anger, but at least receiving the data. Okay, I'm feeling angry. What's this telling me? Oh, somebody's just overstepped my boundary for the third
yeah,
time. Now I have a choice. What do I want to do about that?
yeah.
As
And
opposed to,
sometimes,
how dare you do this,
uh,
which isn't going to solve anything.
yeah, and I think also too, sometimes it gets you into your awareness around your values.
Yeah.
Like, this blank has is really in conflict with blank value, and it makes you angry, and usually it's because, like you said, Leanne, a boundary has been crossed. So sometimes it can be a good thing to get you into your own personal values, because sometimes we just take those for granted as well. um So next, fear, right? Fear, can cause to feel uncertain, unsafe, but there's data behind that fear. And, why is it that you're feeling unsafe? Why is it that you're feeling uncertain? So sometimes that fear can also bounce you into high levels of awareness, that we're kind of sitting backstage and now they're um, stage front. And so fear can also be a good thing if it's harnessed in the right way. Is there anything you'd like to add on to that, Leanne, around
Yeah.
fear?
Fear's a really interesting one because its intention is good. It's giving us a warning sign that, something feels unsafe or uncertain or ambiguous. And if we again listen to that and go, okay, I'm feeling unsafe here. What can I do to confirm my safety? What strategies, what can I build in to navigate that? So fear is good because it gets us to look at things from multiple perspectives. But if we get trapped in fear, then we're not doing anything. So fear can raise its hand and say, hello, I'm here. And we can look at that again with emotional maturity and go, oh, okay, so what's happening? Where am I feeling unsafe? And what can I do about it again? Or
Yeah.
alternatively, if we don't have that emotional maturity and we might go into, oh my God, Chicken Little, the sky is falling, and
Oh,
hibernate and actually not do anything about it.
yeah. Yeah. And especially, if you are an individual who has certainty, like high levels of certainty, being in those uncertain and unsafe can really ignite that fear. So, it's one of those things, like sometimes you have to know when to dial that down so that you can, look at that fear, not be trapped at it, but harness it to help move it in a positive direction.
Yeah. And one of the strategies that I personally use around fear, which have found really useful, is I kind of have an internal dialogue with myself going, okay, mini me, thank you for the warning, right? But I've got this, I'm good. I've done this, this, and this, and now I know I can move forward. Because our brain is wired to look for the threat in the environment. So fear is one of these things that's going to consistently come up. But are the fears actually justified?
Yeah.
Oftentimes they're not, right? So to be able to have that kind of internal dialogue with yourself, going, okay, I call my mini me Leapy. Okay, Leapy, thank you for the warning. I'm aware I'm feeling fearful here. What do I need to do to navigate that space? So I'd recommend something like that could be really useful to listen to the signals and what information they're giving, and then again make the choice to do something differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Which leads us to the third emotion of sadness, the loss or need for compassion. And sadness, and a lot of times there's a lot of grief with the sadness too, right? Because I mean, it could be that you lost a loved one, or that you just got laid off from a job, or a super close friendship has moved on. And just like we talked around anger and fear, it's like being able to not be trapped by sadness, but to harness it. What data is it telling you? How can you reframe your sadness into moving you? And what I'm saying is not to feel the sadness, because you need to feel it. You need to work through it, but harness it in a way that you can give your time. And that's like one thing with grief, right? Grief has no timeline. It just shows up sometimes. So being able to say, you know what? I give myself permission. I'm allowing myself to feel sad, be sad, work through whatever it is that you need to work through, but then also be able to have the internal resilience, right? To move into a happy state, but be able to give the space it needs so that you can feel it, be with it, etc. Is there anything you'd like to put in there, Leeanne, around sadness?
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't want sadness. We want to be happy, happy, joy, joy. And that's not reality. Like we get sad. And the more we try and suppress it, the bigger the emotion gets, right? So allowing it, leaning into it, coming through it. Like the only way out of an emotional state is through, right? The more we suppress it, it keeps us trapped there. So I love what you said there about, honoring the sadness, like, honoring the suck. Yeah, it's awful, but I don't want to sit here for the next 10 years. What are some of the things that I can bring
Yeah.
in? What brings me joy so I can kind of have both in my life? So it's not about, oh, I don't want sadness, I only want joy. We can actually have both simultaneously.
Yeah.
And often emotions, we have got like multi layers. I can be nervous and excited at the same time. I can be happy and sad at the same time. And I think, sometimes we don't actually give ourselves permission for these cognitive kind of variances. It's we want black or white, good or bad, and that's not necessarily the way it is.
Yeah. And sometimes, just like you said, how you can feel excited and nervous at the same time, sometimes you feel anger, fear, and sadness all at the same time together too.
Yeah.
So, you know, so it's turning into your inner resilience
Yeah.
to be with it, own it, give the space it needs, and then, let those emotions pass so that you can get to the opposite side of the teeter-totter. Yeah.
Which then brings me to the concept of emotional literacy, because for the majority of humanity, we will generally talk about 5, maybe 6 emotions at best. We're happy, sad, glad, mad, and it's bad. Uh, and that's not really enough. So what we want to do is be able to broaden our emotional literacy, because when we can accurately name what emotion we're feeling, it reduces the power of the emotion. So you might have heard the term name it to tame it, or name it to contain it. So when we can name the actual emotion that we're feeling, as opposed to I'm sad, it might be actually I'm despondent, and rather than I'm angry, actually I'm frustrated or I'm disappointed. Like being able to identify exactly what the word is that we're feeling um, helps us to turn down its hold on us, turn down the power of the emotion. It's why you often hear mums saying to their kids, use your words, because the second that they start to label their emotions, they're reigniting their prefrontal cortex and bringing resources back to their thinking part of the brain, which again turns down that emotional state, right? So,
Mhm.
um, there's a whole lot of information on the internet, like emotion wheels and the like. Some great books around emotional literacy as well, and we've got some book recommendations later, which we'll talk to. But learning actually what is it I'm feeling? It's not just sad or mad. Like it
Mhm.
is actually something else, and it might be 3 things that I'm feeling. But having the ability to be able to articulate that, can have a significant impact on our well-being.
Yeah, and I think with that, a big thing is to encourage yourself to be curious, right? To live into that curiosity is like, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What data is it trying to tell me? Like that example where you said parents are like, use your words,
Yeah,
right? So that right there is some curiosity to use your words. What are your words telling you? What are your emotions telling you? So, but with that, you have to allow yourself to be curious. And a lot of times people, they also get stuck in that, oh, like, no, I don't want to be curious because I don't want to see what's on the other end. You know, um, it doesn't always have to be bad. It could be something amazing. It could be a new reflection. It could be a new insight, something that's just been totally operating in your blind spot. Um, anything you would like to add on curiosity, Leanne?
I think curiosity is the cure-all for so many things.
Yeah.
Like if we can sit in a curious state about our emotions, about how we're feeling, about other people, it like curiosity takes away conflict. Curiosity takes away that negative state, that or what we call that negative state, that high level state.
Mhm.
Curiosity really is such an important skill to master, because it breeds optimism as well.
Yeah.
When we're curious, we're kind of telling ourselves there's another way or there's something else, right? We're not stuck in the yuck.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's all I wanted to add to that.
Yeah. And I see a lot of non-curiosity just, with where we are just in the volatility in this world. And I'll just leave it there for folks to kind of chew on. But there's a lot of non-curiosity going, and you know, like I have to be right. I can't learn to think or see perspective. So curiosity opens that whole floodgate, and it sounds easy to master, but I would challenge folks and our listeners to really ask, challenge yourself, like how curious was I today?
Yeah.
Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. And also is how can I better practice curiosity tomorrow?
Yeah. Such an
Yeah,
important skill.
yeah. Um, and we have a little practice tip in this area, which is called three-step reflection, is to notice, name, and nurture. Anything you'd like to put on that, Leanne?
Yeah, so notice what's going on, right? Name the emotion that you're actually feeling and give yourself some space and grace.
Mhm.
Don't beat yourself up, but also offer others that space and grace, right? But this is really an internal job, and a lot of our growth is internal. So if we can notice actually what we're feeling, if we can call it out and name it, I'm feeling X, like right now, I'm feeling excited and curious, right? Even good emotions we can name. It's just that we normally focus on the ones that aren't serving us so well. And then nurture yourself, have some self compassion.
Yeah,
It's okay to feel. We can't leave our emotions at the door. We're emotional beings having a human experience, right? At the end of the
totally.
day. So learning to navigate and harness and giving yourself that grace and space is
Yeah.
really, really important.
Well, and and I think earlier in our episode today, when kind of internet issues were were at its best, like okay, like I had to notice it's like I just can't believe my internet went out at the hotel. And so, yeah, I was feeling frustrated, but I also was like, you know what? My podcast co-host on the other side, I know she picked it right up, and I'll get on when I get back on. And so, I was kind of doing that in the moment. Like I was noticing, I was naming, but then I nurtured it too. I'm like, you know what? It's going to be okay. Because I know my co-host on the other end, even if I wasn't able to get back on, could have, fulfilled the rest of today's episode. So
And that comes back to that community piece that we were talking about earlier as well, right? Like
absolutely,
having people that you can lean on in those states.
absolutely. And
Mm.
you're always a good one to lean on.
Ditto back at you. Ditto back at you.
Thank you. Um, all right. So now we're going to go into emotional maturity and emotional intelligence, which we've mentioned quite a bit. And, we also have an amazing guest for episode 4 next week, who we will announce a little bit later in today's episode, that will also bring in this EM and EQ piece into next week's conversation as well. So I'll talk a little bit on the emotional maturity, and then I'll turn over for the EQ for Leanne. So when we think of emotional maturity, right, what does it mean? Simple, it's the ability to manage emotions responsibly. When you think of yourself in just a general mature state, you're being mature, you're handling yourself responsibly, dignity, respect, treating others, etc. So it's that maturity around how you're managing your emotions in the
Can I
moment.
just can I just
Yeah,
add? I
absolutely.
heard I heard this little thing the other day and I really love it. Responsibility is our ability to respond, right?
Yeah,
Taking that responsibility is my ability to respond, not react, but to respond. I loved when I heard that. I thought, oh, I want to share that.
yeah. No, thank you for putting that in. I think that's a good gold nugget for people to just kind of take with them and to kind of noodle on.
Mm.
Also, emotional maturity is owning how you react in situations and not blaming others. It is so easy, and I see it all the time. People blame shifting and not taking responsibility for their own actions and reactions. Not saying that others in a situation don't have their own emotions and reactions to own as well, but owning your part, being responsible for your part, that shows immense emotional responsibility and just integrity at the end of the day. And also, it's about that balance of empathy and accountability. Some people have super high levels of empathy, and other people have situational empathy, right? Where they're empathetic in some situations and more empathetic in others. But also that accountability piece and how those two, if they're dancing in harmony, how powerful that can be. Anything else you'd like to add, Leanne, on emotional maturity before you talk about emotional intelligence?
Well, I want to talk about the empathy piece, which is also part of emotional intelligence, but the empathy is not always external. How empathetic are you to yourself? Like most of us would, are much harsher to ourselves than we would be to anyone else, right? And if we can't offer ourselves that kindness and that empathy, it's harder to then offer it to others as well. So empathy is two ways, right? It's be empathetic to self and to others. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, and I just that's all I wanted to say to that because I think it's so important.
Oh, super important um, so many times we as individuals put ourselves always second. And there are situations I do firmly believe, where we need to take the back seat or we need to put others first. And also, not a but an and also is you also, like Leanne said, have to have that empathy for yourself. Because if you really don't have empathy for yourself, you can't really, at a super authentic level, have it for other folks. So it needs to be that good balance.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'll pick up from here, Jason. So those skills, this emotional maturity, right? Being responsible, responding ability, right? So important. I really enjoyed that. And we need some emotional intelligence to be able to navigate that. So we've already spoken at high level around, our ability to notice the awareness of our own emotions. Like, what am I feeling? Like, what am I actually feeling right now? Being able to label that. Um, ability to manage them, So we've talked about, okay, I don't want to react here. It's not going to give me the result I want. The outcome that I'm actually after is this. I had a conversation actually with a friend of mine this week who had received an email and was going off, right? And this person said to me, I'm going to respond and I'm going to send this and this and this and this and this in an email. What do you think? And my question was, what outcome do you want? Because if you send that email, is that going to give you the outcome you want? And like there was just an instant pause. It was like, well, no, it's not going to give me the outcome I'm actually after. Great.
Mhm.
So maybe have a pause and a think about it and then think about the email later. But if we can lead with what outcome do I want in this relationship, in this conflict, in this situation, it really helps us to navigate the emotional state because it's easy to fly off the handle. But is that the outcome you want? Is it gonna give you the outcome that you're hoping for? So that ability to be able to manage them is so important. And also recognizing and influencing the emotion in others. Like I said earlier, we directly impact and influence other people's emotions by our state, right? Um, and so if we're showing up stressed and frazzled, everyone around us is going to be stressed and frazzled. If we're showing up with optimism and joy, then those around us are going to feel more optimistic and more joyful. So being able to notice, recognize the emotion in ourselves and in others, and to be able to influence them is really the skill of emotional intelligence. And to do that, we need that self awareness. We need to kind of lift the rug and look underneath and go, oh, yes, that's me. And this is what's going on. And sometimes that's not pretty. Sometimes it's actually pretty ugly to take that
Mhm.
responsibility and go, oh, God, it's me. It's me. I'm the problem. It's me. Quoting a Taylor Swift song there. But anyway, like if we, look and go, actually, how am I contributing to the mess here? How am I colluding with the dysfunction? And that self awareness gives us the skill. And then being able to use some of these tips for regulation, movement, breathing, mindfulness, pausing, bringing some of those skills in. Journaling is another favorite one of mine. Like, get it out of your head and onto paper. Journaling is a great tool that can help you navigate what's going on. Um, and again, that skill of empathy, which allows us to be social. We're social creatures. We're not meant to be isolated. And we're meant to be connected. Like, that's our survival mechanism as humans, because we don't have fangs, we don't have claws, we don't run super fast like cheetahs. So for us to survive as a species, we need that connection.
Yeah.
It's not a luxury, it's a basic human need. So that social skills comes from empathy and vulnerability and being able to look within and go, oh, don't like it, but I can do something about it. And we'll talk more about this possibly in next week's, but there are some learnable skills that we can bring in to emotional intelligence. And I'll speak to them at high level. And this is by a group called 6 Seconds, who is an emotional intelligent um, non-for-profit organization whose mission it is to have millions of emotionally intelligent people in the world and leaders. And they talk about their 8 competencies of emotional intelligence. So watch this space. We'll bring some more of this in next week when we have the conversation with Alison, who's a guru in the space of emotional intelligence, vulnerability and empathy, learning to be for our mental state as well as our emotional state, because it's all in cahoots. It's this seesaw effect that happens, and we need to navigate that. So I just want to kind of pause there, Jason. Is there anything else that you want to bring in around EQ?
Yeah, one thing that, and I'm going to be doing some research on this actually in my doctoral dissertation, is um, about leading with emotional intelligence, right? And by using neuro leadership, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence foundations. And one thing that you were talking about, that email, right? And hey, if you send this email, is it going to really get you the outcome that you want? Well, so one of the things is how can you use artificial intelligence as a companion, right? How can you use it as your buddy? I mean, oftentimes, like, I'll just get an email out the way it's in my head, what emotions I'm feeling, just to get it out. And that's even a release too, right? And then I'll put it through ChatGPT, right? And to say, can you help give this email a warmer feeling, a more conversational tone? And it's amazing how it can just tweak it just right to be like, okay, yeah, that sounds way nicer than actually how I wrote it out. And so it can actually help be kind of a thinking companion for you. And especially like if you're super frustrated, or if it's at the end of the day and you're just trying to get through emails, and you might know that your emotional maturity and your EQ are low, and having that awareness is maturity itself, right? But it's like, okay, how can I use my AI companion to like help me get these emails out so that I'm not more behind, but I can get them out in a professional, warmer way, and that's not going to ignite emotions on the other side of the screen.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring in the AI component, because I think it can be helpful. And I know there's still lots of people out there that are like, oh my God, I would never use AI. I'm so, blah, blah, blah. But, it's once people start using it, they're like, oh my gosh, like, I wish I would have been doing this a year ago.
Oh, listen, I call it my BFF these days because I use it often. I had an episode myself recently where I had to respond to an email that was extremely triggering, and I said to AI, "This is the gist of the email I've received. Can you help me formulate a response that isn't emotive?" So I wanted
Yeah.
a response that was direct and clear without the coming into it. And
Yeah.
what I got back, I could not have written as well myself. Like,
Mhm.
it was just superb. It was on point. It was structured. So yeah, I use AI for a whole lot of stuff these days. And I think if we, again, that awareness and the maturity to be able to go, I'm not at my best here, and sending this is not going to be good. Utilizing skills, getting somebody else to read your email. I'm one to, I used to be one to type the email, like verbal diarrhea into the email, and then not send it. Right. I just wouldn't send it for, a few hours and then go back and review it later. And even giving yourself that space, you go back
Yes.
later and go, oh no, that's not going to work.
Yes.
I-
Totally. Totally. I mean, especially, if if you work for somebody who's very intense and high pressured and, is result, sometimes you feel that emotional pressure, that I've got to send it out, or you may be in an emotive state. And, having that companion, or writing it out, taking a walk, doing one of those things, breath work, whatever, like you relook at it through a different lens and be like, no, this isn't going to achieve the outcome that I want. And so I think both with that space and that AI companion, you can get the outcome that you want. So, it's one of those things. It's like AI is not going away. Um, it definitely will replace some jobs, but if you learn how to use it as a companion,
as your co-pilot.
as your co-pilot, so much more magic can be created, and you can actually be in a better and healthier emotional well-being state, because life after work, then you have home, and there's a whole different set of dynamics there, and emotions and et ceteras, right? So we have different spaces where that need our emotional energy. And so why not use the tools out there that can help you to continually to not go into that low battery mode that we talked about last week, but to keep that battery charged as much as possible, so that you do have the cognitive space to be present, with your family or your pets, or et cetera, or friends, outside of work. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think we're gonna do a deep dive on this topic in our, in like down the track, because we've got a whole thing on technology and use, and
yeah,
technologically well-being. So, um, I think it's a great conversation, and we've opened the loop, and we will close that at some stage and continue the conversation, because I agree that since I've been using AI, and I don't use it all the time and not for everything, but it has done, it takes away some of the mundane jobs that I used to do, which allows me to be more in the creative space to do the
mhm.
things that I want to do. And even that shifts your emotional state, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah,
like it's given me freedom, it's given me a bit more time. So now I can do some of this other stuff. And I think just, yeah, again, well, so many, there are some scary bits, I'm not gonna deny that, but there is also some really great bits, and from an EQ perspective, as Jason said, if we can free some of ourselves up so we can be present and
mhm.
have the resources to show up effectively for our friends and family, our children, our pets, our community, our colleagues at work,
Yeah,
we wanna have a ripple, we have a ripple effect. We do have a ripple effect. The question is, what sort of ripple effect do you wanna
right,
have, right?
right.
Like, do you want
And
a
also,
tsunami that wipes people out, or, you know,
right.
like, because it
Well,
could
and
be.
also exactly, and I think also too, on the self level, right? To give yourself more capacity to do your hobbies, to do your interests, to travel, right? So you're not so emotionally and physically exhausted all the time. Um, so I think, those are some good things for, for folks to think about. Um, and I love your journaling, so much could come out from journaling, whether it's pen to paper or marker to flip chart or, finger to keypad. There's so many different ways to journal and to be kind of present with your thoughts and in encouraging that self-compassion and that self-curiosity.
And journaling allows you to get that yuck out in a safe space, as
Mhm.
opposed to, yelling at somebody else, or like I know there's been pages in my journal where I've just written the F word 100 times over and over in big letters, small letters, like, but getting that out, then I was able to function. So sometimes we've got to get it out, and choosing to get it out in an effective way. Exercise is another way. It physically gets it out of your system. So yeah, finding the skills, whatever it is. So we're coming towards the end of our conversation today, and we've got some top tips and book recommendations and a few things that we want to discuss with you.
Yes.
But I think the two things that I want to say is practice self-compassion. Really check in. How am I feeling right now? There's a great app actually. It's called the how what is that app called? It's a free app, and it reminds you multiple times a day to check in on how you're feeling, and it gives you a whole range of words. It's called How We Feel, and it's got
Mhm.
like a colorful rainbow love heart on it. It's a free app. It's fantastic to use. So you can start building your emotional literacy and then
Yes.
watching your emotional patterns over a period of time. I would highly recommend that. It's a great app. Um,
Yeah, I have that app too, and it actually asks, like where you're at, who are you with, so you can see patterns of emotions. Like, oh gosh, like when I'm with these groups of people, like that's when I'm feeling most happy and most joyful, or when I'm doing blank is when I'm feeling the not so great emotions, right? So definitely highly recommend that app as well.
yeah. And the reflection I would like you to walk away with today is this question of what would change if I treated my emotions as teachers, right? If they're giving me information, if I'm learning, what is it? How would my life be different if I was harnessing and in control? So
Mhm.
I think that's such a beautiful thing to remember.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shall we move to the top tips and book
Yep,
recommendations?
absolutely. Give me 1 second. I'll do my share screen. All righty. Again, technology at its best. So, book recommendations. We've got 3 books. Jason, do you want to talk about the first one?
Sure. Yes. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with Mel Robbins. She is an amazing author, podcaster, just has so much wisdom. And there is this book that is available both in hard copy and via Audible. It's called The Let Them Theory. I'm sure folks have seen her, the ads for it on on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. She did a great interview with Oprah on this book. So it's the Let Them Theory, a life-changing tool that millions of people can't stop talking about. So definitely a top book for folks to take a look at. Leeanne, do you want to talk about the second one?
Yeah, Atlas of the Heart. Brene Brown. She is just, she's a research scientist in the field of leadership, emotional intelligence, a whole range of stuff. But the Atlas of the Heart is really about emotional literacy. So it's about making and mapping meaningful connections and the language of human experience. So I just did this book with a book club group of women, and I really loved it because she groups emotions together around titles like, what happens when I feel let down, or what happens when I feel sad, and all the emotions that come together under that experience. So it's a really great starting point, or a really great book to start looking at what are the emotions? What do they mean? How do they show up? To build that emotional literacy, because as we said earlier, if you name it, you can tame it or contain it. So yeah, Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown. And again, I'm pretty sure it's on Audible. I didn't check that, so that's my bad. But definitely you can get it as a hardcover or softcover book, and it's a great read to take you through. And do you want me to speak to number 3, Jason, or have you read that one?
I have not read number 3 yet, but it will be going on to my book list.
Yeah. So emotional agility is all about emotional intelligence. So it brings in some of the neuroscience, some of the emotional intelligence concepts to really help you to be agile, because it is about this agility. Like resilience is about bouncing forward. It's about having the ability um, to repair, to restore ourselves, to reconnect, right? And having emotional agility allows us to do that. So I really enjoyed reading this book. It was an easy read, and but lots of good concepts in there around navigating your internal space so you can get unstuck. You can embrace change in this VUCA world where everything is so out of control, and you can thrive in your, your life and your work. So another great book recommendation.
Great. So
Yes.
go and put those on your book lists, folks.
Yeah. And shall we go to our top tips?
Top tips of the episode. Yes. Okay, so our first tip from our episode today is respond, don't react. Right action over reaction. So remember, listen to understand versus listening to react is super important. And Leeanne, do you want to talk about the second one?
Yeah. Regulate before you relate. And I love this because it just talks about um, regulation is not about controlling, right? It's the awareness that, okay, something's going on here and the ability to recover. So, use breathing, I would say, to help regulate your nervous system in any situation, and a bit of mindfulness. It's that your breath comes with you everywhere, right? It's a really easy thing to do. And that box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, and do a few rounds of that, helps you to really regulate yourself before you go into meetings, go into conversations, go into anything that could be emotionally heightening, shall we say.
Love that. And our last tip of the day is treat your emotions as data. What are they telling you? Not as drama. It's so important. Look at the data. Look what it's telling you. How can you harness it and move it forward in a positive direction? And emotions are the messengers. They tell us so much. And listen before you react. So yes, so those are our top 3 tips of the day and our top book recommendations for this episode. And I think we'll be moving into our closing. So our guest next week and our episode for Dimension 3 is mental and intellectual well-being, the thriving mind, curiosity, learning, and focus. And our guest is the director and CEO of the Courageous Leadership Hub, Allison Leilu.
Leilu. Yeah,
Almost said
Alison
Lalu.
Leilu.
Do you want to speak a little bit about Allison, since she lives on your continent?
Yeah, Alison is a fellow coach who I've known and worked alongside for many years now. She is an expert in emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. She is a certified Dare to Lead trainer. So Dare to Lead is Brene Brown's course, and Alison is certified to run those courses on behalf of Brene Brown. She is a emotional intelligence coach. She has conversational intelligence skills. Like, this woman is the bomb around being able to navigate your internal space. So emotional, mental, and physical, and how we show up in other places. She also runs a fantastic course for leaders, and which no doubt she'll talk about next week as well. But it's a real honor and privilege to have Ali sharing the stage with us next week. I can't wait for the
Yeah,
conversations that we have.
no, me too. I'm so excited for this conversation next week, and
Yeah.
um, and had the privilege of being a participant in one of her leadership courses, which she'll talk about next week as well. And so, just a gem of a human being, and just is going to be such a light to next week's episode and conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will stop the share for a moment just so we can bid you all farewell on our conversation today.
Yes, on emotional well-being, resilience, and action. And as always, thanks for joining us for today's conversation around emotional well-being, resilience and action, managing your emotions and stress.
So, as always, we really hope that today has sparked some new ideas or fresh perspectives, or again, even just a question that you might start exploring, right? Like, there's hopefully it sparked something new for you.
Exactly. And, giving your permission and allowing yourself in knowing, at the end of the day, you're the owner of how you show up um, and how you drive your emotions, right? And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple: to have those conversations that matter, and to remind you, you don't have to do this thing called life and all of its complexities and to figure it out on your own. We're here at Let's Talk to be a friend um, alongside you, and hope that you get so much out of our conversations.
Yeah. So, again, if you like what you heard today, share it with others, subscribe, and join us next week so we can keep the conversation going.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible.
Absolutely.
So
Limitless
let's
conversation.
talk. Let's talk with real conversations.
Real conversations and limitless possibilities. Thank you so much. Have a very good afternoon, evening, morning,
You
wherever you're dialing in from around the world. Take care, everybody.
take care. We'll see you next week.